history is always good when you can learn from them. And the administration of Soludo, I think, brought the massive restructuring that we saw in the banking sector, which has, of course, launched Nigerian banks into some global status now. So that competitiveness has helped the growth that we have seen over the years. So that's a good thing for this sector. But of course, on the other side, on the flip side, is it also brought with it certain behaviors that are not necessarily supportive of the sector in terms of when you find the heavy involvement of CBN as poster representation of banks, especially when they were opening branches abroad, and you find like the governor always all hopping around with the CEOs. That is not very good lesson. But in terms of the entire transformation that happened during the administration of Soludo, I think we're still enjoying that benefit up until now, because that has launched Nigerian banks into global status. And I guess at that time it was the right time to do. Of course, there were failures here and there, but in terms of the benefit, we should focus more on the benefit. And we saw that enhancing, one, the value of the entire architecture of the Nigerian economy, the depth and the width of our economy was seen because it attracted investors from outside here, as well as also put global attention on the Nigerian economy on the one side, as well as our banking sector, particularly on the other side. But as you roll down into the administration of Sanusi, which coincided largely with the global financial crisis, I think the administration did well in terms of managing through the crisis. However, we still have the controversial events of how some banks were taken over, and it still continues to today challenge our respect for governance, even now, even though we don't have the entire picture of what transpired, which is also wrong. We should have full picture of what went wrong. We are hearing issues of plea bargain, issues of CEOs that were removed, banks licenses that were taken away, or banks CEOs that were removed and then the banks sold again to other parties, and that continues to raise issues that of concern, both locally and internationally. So when next we are doing this kind of action or government intervention, I think this government would need to learn from that, so that in terms of being above board in all of these transactions, is very important for the growth of the economy on the one side and then the banking sector itself. If you approach it in an emperor-like way, it poses a lot of concern globally, because as an economy, we are integrated into the global system. So those are some of the things I think that should be taken away. But lastly, if you look at Emefiele, that's even more, it's humongous. What kind of lessons? I mean, the kind of report we are seeing now, like they say, hindsight is good sight. Whether from the point of view of events of corruption, to the event of view of fraud, to all other internal crises and all of that, it's a bit of a massive concern. And that is where it's important that this administration would operate at a level of transparency and discipline that can help to restore confidence, both in the regulator itself and the banking sector. Secondly is the fact that you have a situation where if you take the issue of the currency redesign, that alone, the massive economic costs and fundamental human rights assault on people alone, we can't recover that. In a sane economy, we can't even quantify the cost of that on an economy. And that brings me to the fact that the current architecture of the central bank needs to be looked at. because the unilateral action that happened at the level of the central bank and without certain other high-level conversation that would necessitate currency redesign in other climes didn't happen in our climate. And that is the consequence of that is what we saw. People are still suffering from that today. Many businesses, especially at the micro level, are still lost. They have not been able to recover. Remember that the impact of COVID was still on. Even till now, businesses are still struggling with that. Now, the event of this currency redesign and how it was managed killed many businesses, and a lot of people died alongside it, that because they couldn't have access to money to sustain themselves. And there are very personal stories that you hear across the country, and part of some of which I personally witnessed, and I found that it's heartbreaking, because that is because of institutional failures that the CBN itself created. So those are the things I think we need to learn. But I mean, when you talk about the current structure of CBN, that's another conversation that we'll look at. Thank you. Well, I think they have done well so far in terms of handling the issue of the currency devaluation and recovery. However, of course, the devaluation itself, the process was poorly done, in my opinion. Poorly done because there are certain fundamental processes to currency devaluation. We didn't follow those processes. So you need to have, apart from the general conversation that should have happened in sensitizing the public, there are economic processes and policies that should have laid the foundation for the currency devaluation. If that had been done and the public was made to understand the implication and what that will pose to us at the time, if there is proper knowledge and dissemination and information, I believe the tension that followed it would have been properly managed. People's response would have also, in terms of expectation, would have also been able to align with what the government is trying to achieve. So because we didn't have a roadmap as to what are the fundamental or underlying philosophy or assumptions that is governing the devaluation, it didn't help the public in terms of response. So it caused even additional, apart from the jittery nature, it caused people's response to it to be more negative in terms of rushing to want to buy more currency, either for some people buying it for storage as an investment edge, some people trying to offshore it, and a lot of other criminal activity that then occurred along the chain. But if there is proper education and we have laid the pathway for that will govern the devaluation process, not just as a matter of thought or just as a matter of conversation, it would have helped in terms of how that is handled. And then, of course, the various economic policies that should have been put in place along the line of fulfilling the devaluation would have helped the general economy. So, but because these were not in sight, it caused panic, tension, and general crisis. Well, in terms of rolling back towards recovery, I believe the central bank, they've done better now because there is better communication now, better direction now in terms of how they've responded, in terms of the policies that are undertaken. Of course, one of the things we've clamored for example, is the fact that the BDC system should be made to be more professional. We all see high street currency marts around different parts of the world. They have solid reporting system. Their operations are clearly defined, and you can find them on the high streets. So they provide these financial services under regulatory oversight. That is what is missing here. We have to ensure that we bring professionalism and strong regulation into that system so that people that are going to be involved in it would have certain level of exposure, understanding, and compliance to certain policies. That's very important because this is financial services. So those are the things I think where they've provided some line of sight to that, but we want to see how that will be implemented.